Brittany Engel and Emily Snock with Mathematica. First thing we're going to do is go through some updates. Brittany had a call that she had to get on prior to, so she'll be joining us here in just a second. But one of the things we want to do first and foremost is bring you guys up to date on where we're at with grant status, our GATA requirements, and the intake process. So currently all of the grants have been executed and they're obligated at the Comptroller's office. So that's a huge relief for me, and I know for you guys also. It will probably be towards the end of this week to the first of next week that the Comptroller's office will have these obligated, and you should be able to go onto the Comptroller's site and see the obligation. Next week on Wednesday, we're going to do the training session for the GRS system, and Sheila will walk through the process once again that we did months ago on how to report cost and request cash for this grant. So that will happen next Wednesday. So I strongly recommend that whoever's going to be doing your financial part of this grant participate in that so you know how to report your costs and request cash. And once again, the costs that we're going to enter are going to be the costs that have been charged to this grant, actual costs charged to this grant, and you can do it through the date that you report your cost. So I know that we are at the end of a state fiscal year, and once again, we're in the same predicament that we were last year without having a state budget yet. If there is not a state budget, we will have to go through the same process we did last year, which is getting legislative authority so that we can appropriate federal funds. And so that is what EPIC is. It's part of a federal funding process, and DHS will be going through that process along with Commerce to get the appropriation of authority if there is not a budget, which is tomorrow, by the end of the state fiscal year. With that being said, if there is not a budget and we don't have the appropriation complete yet, you can still report your costs, and these have to be actual costs. So you report all of your costs through the end of June in the GRS system, and then we can do cash requests on that, on the actual cost. And then I'm looking into, and I've gotten some information, and I do believe that we can request the upfront funding for a month of operation also as we're doing this. And that's something that will have potentially the capacity to do even without the budget approval or with the appropriation. But your costs are those that are gone through the end of June, and then I will have to work with you as far as what we can do as far as advance funding and what would be allowed with that based upon the circumstances that we're in right now. So I just kind of wanted to give you an update. We will still be able to get cash out to the field with you regardless. If there's a budget or not, based upon your actual expenditures through the end of June. And then the next bit of news is with the GATA requirements. We are going to have to comply when it comes to reporting with the GATA requirements, and we'll be doing some training. Our first report will be due the end of July. So we will be providing you training on that too, what's going to be required as far as reporting. We did receive the DGRs, our traditional DGRs from you guys, and at this point we may continue with that until the actual GATA reporting documents are established and completed by OMB. But the reporting requirements will mirror what's required with our GATA requirements. So I just wanted to kind of bring you up to date with that also. And then with the intake process, and I may have, Dee, if you're okay with this, I may have you kind of walk through quickly what's happening with the intake process, Dee and Natasha, and the revisions that were just implemented today.
Sure thing. I can, I'll go over the public page. I'm going to bring my screen over so that you can see what's been going on. This just happened yesterday. That's why I was calling and checking in with everybody to get you to update your applications, because we've just implemented these changes for the application. So now what we do, there is no more NOCTI. So everybody say, yay! Not on the front end anyway. And so what the participants at the DHS offices now have to do is they go to step 1 and watch the videos that they'd always been watching. So This is the step 1 page. And if you guys need to reverse refer people, the flyers are right here on this step 1 page. So they watch some videos. Then they go to a quick 5 to 25 minutes, depending on how fast they read and how fast they answer, 5 to 25 minute career cluster inventory where they answer, yes, I like that, no, I don't like that, I'm not sure. Then from there, they go to the training programs review. And on here, what they now get to do is they pick their region. So let me scroll down here a little bit so you can see a little bit more of this. They pick their region. Okay, computer isn't going fast enough for me. Then they pick, based on the region that they selected, they pick what the job categories are, the career categories are that they like. So maybe they want architecture, maybe they want law and public safety, and maybe they want to find out about TDL. Then they enter what their circumstances are. Can they pass a hepatitis test? Are they interested in careers that require a drug test? No. And then maybe they are, I'm going to just leave it at that. And then they put in their zip code. So I'm going to put in a Chicago zip code here. Based on that information, there are no training programs. Okay, so let me take off this one, because the drug test is a big stopping point for everything. They have programs here that they can see and find out the information about. They see how far away the training program is from them based on the zip code that they entered. And then they can watch videos over here about the overall information on there that they can deal with finding information, and then watch videos about people in the job. Step 4 is the actual application. And on the application, we have changed the drug test question, and we've also changed the background check question to reflect some information that you all helped us make the decision upon. We've also changed a couple of other things. So if you want to look at the application itself, you can view the SlideShare presentation right here on the screen and go from slide to slide so that you can see what the questions actually are. The participant does have to be invited to partake in the application. And last but not least, oh yes, and Natasha just put in there that the new language includes violent and nonviolent felony suggestions. So we have, are you registered on the sexual offender registry? Do you have a violent felony conviction? Do you have a nonviolent felony conviction? You guys all answered your questions, so you know what they all say. But for those of you who maybe didn't actually do the answering, that's some of the things that we did change. Then this is where they actually go through random assignments. So the process will now include these 5 steps, and by the end of the day, those people will have an assignment either to SNAP or to EPIC, and they will walk away with an appointment. So it's very important that all of you make sure that you have appointments in there through the end of August right now. And I noticed one of the organizations does not have their training intake site listed, and I had a conversation with them, but we need to get that up and running. And then we also need to make sure that you guys have added, and some of you I've been going through, I'm about 2/3 of the way down the list, and there's only a couple of people that need to add more beyond July. So many of you have all the way through September, October, or November in the appointment updates. This, because of the change of the application and because of the elimination of the NOCD, it also It also gives us the opportunity to have changed the intake dashboard for DHS, so the process is much smoother for that. I'm not quite sure who just moved this file, but we need to take that down again. Okay, then we have a question from Alana that says, when it comes to appointments, why are clients being scheduled out for a month? Out for a month when? Where? For you or for DHS? For the CBOs?
Seems to me, why do they need to fill out the calendar for a month?
Oh, because the person might not be able to meet that calendar. But we just want you to be prepared. We don't want you to get to the end of the month and then not be getting any people anymore. So if we have it scheduled a little bit further out, it makes it a little bit easier for you to not have to remember those things.
And I think the thought process behind that too is, yeah, I mean, we definitely have a slow intake process right now, and once we start picking up, we want to make sure that we have enough slots for these clients. So when the volume starts picking up, that there's available times for these individuals to be able to get appointments with you guys as they're being assigned. So this process is really streamlined. I think it's going to be much more beneficial for the clients, much more beneficial to get our numbers and start getting clients rolling in the system. And like I said, it was just implemented today, so I'm sure there's going to be some stuff we're going to have to work out bug-wise, but it's much prettier and it's much nicer interface that we've got with this, so we're pretty excited about that. What I'd like to do now, though, is we do have Brittany on. So Brittany and Emily are with Mathematica, and part of the study requirements is that we do a cost analysis with this. And this cost analysis is something that all of us do. DHS has to do, the Commerce does it, Illinois WorkNet does it, and all of the CBOs we're going to have to do this. And don't be overwhelmed by this. It does look kind of onus when you're looking at it the very first time, but this is something that will be sent in on a quarterly basis to Mathematica, and Emily and Brittany are going to help facilitate you guys and help you get this set up. And once you get the information set up and at once, each quarter it's going to be a relatively simple process to fill out. But this is data that they need for the evaluation piece of it, so they can determine, the benefit, the return on investment based upon what the costs were for this. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brittany. Thank you so much for being on with us, and she's going to explain this tool that they've developed for all of us to keep our costs.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tammy. So my name is Brittany English, and I'm a research analyst at Mathematica. So Mathematica is conducting the evaluation of the SNAP ENT pilots across all of the 10 sites. And one of our partners, MDRC, is working more closely with the Illinois site on sort of everything related to the evaluation with the exception of the cost study. So my goal for today is to just introduce all of you to the cost study because I'm sure this is something you haven't heard quite as much about, and to also sort of show you some of the data that we're going to need. And as Tammy mentioned, you can see on my screen right now there is an Excel workbook up, and you're probably seeing that there are quite a few tabs on it, and that can look a good bit overwhelming. But this is, as she mentioned, something that will get pared down as you go. So hopefully it'll become less onerous over time, and also myself and my colleague Emily Snook will be available to help you all with this. So we're not just going to send you a massive workbook and say fill this out and move forward. We'll be there to provide technical assistance related to the cost study as well. So the first thing, I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the cost study as a whole. So this is a congressionally mandated study, and they mandated that we do this cost study component. So what we're doing is a cost-benefit analysis. So we'll look at the cost of operating pilot services compared to the benefits of those services, so looking at different outcomes like employment and earnings and that kind of thing. And then we'll also compare the costs of operating the pilot services versus the regular SNAP services that are provided. So we're doing this for each of the pilots, and we need to do it in a consistent way across those pilots. So one key point, though, for the cost study, when we're saying costs for the purposes of the cost study, we're referring to all costs associated with operating the program. So not just those things that you might be invoicing for or getting reimbursed for. We're looking at things like in-kind costs that you might also be sort of incurring as providing those services. So that's all the sort of thing that we're trying to get through these workbooks that I'll show you. So we're looking at costs through a few different buckets. And one of the files that I think was distributed before this meeting shows those different buckets. So the big things that we'll be looking at are sort of staff time, the actual costs of the services that are being provided, the costs of the facilities where you're operating services, those kinds of things. So as I kind of show you the workbook, some of that will become more clear. And it looks like, sorry, I'm getting used to this webinar format, so I was just looking to see if anyone had questions in the chat. So if you do, as I'm going through, just feel free to sort of pop those in there. I know this is going to be a lot of information. And we can definitely...
We'll catch the questions for you, Brittany.
Okay,
we'll
awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. So that's kind of the key things about the cost study. So this is something we're doing across all of the pilots, and we're doing across all of the entities within the pilots. So as Tammy was mentioning, this is something we're having the grantees do too, because they're part of also operating the pilot and the services that are being delivered through it. So I'm going to start by showing you all this workbook that I think you might have received through email or downloaded in advance of the meeting, and it probably at that time looked overwhelming. So I'll just start by walking through this and then can hopefully make it look a little bit less intimidating as we go through things. So the first tab that you'll see when you get this is an instructions tab. So it's giving you some information about the cost-benefit component of the study. It'll tell you about the information that we're collecting as part of the cost study, how this is organized, so it's showing you each of these different sections that are here. And then what we'll do is we'll send you a workbook to complete on a quarterly basis, and it'll always have a reporting period specified in it. So right now, that's just a placeholder that says specify reporting period. But the first one that all of the providers receive will cover the first quarter that you were sort of engaged in pilot services. And then it also provides some details on what information you should use to complete this workbook. So some of these things would be like actual payment records rather than a budget. So we want to know what things are actually costing rather than what was budgeted. And then also information on who should be completing the workbook. So, you know, that might not be the folks that are on the phone right now. That might be a fiscal person or something like that. So we can work with them as well to go through the workbook. So that's kind of the instructions tab. That's pretty simple. The next tab that I have up is just some information about your agency. So, you know, we'll put in here the name of your organization. We'll want some information around who's actually completing this workbook. So if we have any questions, we're going to just want to know who to follow up with regarding those questions. And then the final field here is just documenting anything unusual that may have affected pilot costs during that reporting period. So we have some examples in here. This could be something like unusually high turnover or just general changes in how your agency operates. So this is just a place to document some of that. Okay. So, and I'm just trying to zoom in on these so that they're not too small as we're talking. So the next tab is about staff and volunteers. So this is where you're going to really be documenting a lot of the information for your program. And a lot of the information that's in here is just going to carry over each time you do the cost reporting. So it's going to require a bit more effort on the front end, but then it should be pretty simple as you move forward. So on every tab, we do provide more information about each of the fields that we'll be asking you to complete. So at the top, it'll always have things here like saying, you know, how to complete each of the fields, so entering salary or wage or something like that. So I'll scroll down and you can see that more. So the first thing we're asking for is information on everyone who's actually working on providing pilot services. So we don't want to know individual names or anything like that, but we do want to know the titles of people that are involved in providing services. So that might be something like case manager or something like that. For those folks who are providing services, we also want to know what their main responsibilities are. So I'll work probably with Tammy and some others sort of at the grantee level to figure out what some of these main responsibilities will be, and we'll put them in these drop-down menus that are here right now. And then you can select from those. So we'd want to know sort of the primary 2 responsibilities. And this information will all carry over, once we get it on the first data collection. Then we would want to know the salary or wage for that person. So you could provide either an annual salary or an hourly wage. So you would do that number here, and then in the next field you'd tell us sort of what the unit is there. So if it's annual or hourly or something like that. Then the next field is just the value of payroll taxes or fringe benefits. So this is something your fiscal folks can probably quickly answer, sort of if it's easier to put a percentage there or a dollar amount. And then we'd want to know how much of that salary is being funded by the pilot. So this would be a percentage, and if it's a set percentage, we can just carry that over every month. If it varies, then or every quarter rather, I'm sorry. If it varies, then we need to have you complete that on a quarterly basis. So we'll want to know information about when people start actually working on the pilot, their hours worked per week, and then the percent of those hours that are actually spent on the pilot. So I think what will likely happen is almost every field we've gone through at that first data collection, we'd get all of that information. And then we'd also get these hours worked and percent of time spent on the pilot. In subsequent data collections, we would really probably only need you to complete hours worked per week and the percent of time spent on the pilot. So you'll see then that just this final field is this percent of pilot time spent on evaluation activities. That's a little bit confusing. So, you guys are all on the phone with me right now thinking about sort of a component of the evaluation. So if someone's spending, say, 50% of their time on the pilot, but 10% of that time is spent talking to MDRC about sort of the evaluation or something like that, we would want that 10% entered here so that we can subtract that off, because that's not actually time spent providing services. And I know we are tight on time, so I'm going to get cranking now. So just to sort of finish out this tab, we'll also want to know with those fringe categories, the fringe number up above, sort of what's included in that. So these are all just yes, no drop-down menus. So you would say yes or no. It includes unemployment insurance, health insurance, etc. And then the final piece on this tab is around volunteers. So, some of you might use volunteers to help provide services to pilot participants. If you do, we need to try and assign a value to that. So we would want to know sort of what their position is, what their primary responsibilities are, similar to the information above, their hours worked per week, and then an estimated hourly wage for what a paid employee would be. So if someone's doing something sort of similar to case management or something like that, maybe you would just use the hourly wage that a typical case manager would get. And then just the final thing on here, and this is on every tab, we always have an explanatory notes field. So this is where you can provide any additional information about what's included here. Okay. And I saw there's a question there about when the first reports will be due. So I actually need to confirm all of that. So at this point, you guys are probably have completed about your first quarter of services. So Emily and I would work on preparing the workbooks, and they're typically due about a month after we send them to you. So you have about a month to complete everything. Okay. So I moved over to this Direct Services tab, and this is where we're really getting into the services that you're providing as part of the pilot. So the service contracts information, you don't need to worry about. That's for the grantee to actually complete. So for your workbooks, we'll kind of block out those cells about it. The next field here is for supportive services. So if you guys are providing anything like transportation benefits or anything like that, we'd want to capture some of that information here. So just the type of service, the cost, the number of folks that are receiving it, and again, the percent paid with pilot funds. So that percent paid with pilot funds field is always going to be a key one for us because that's getting at, total costs versus the costs that are being funded by the pilot. As we scroll down, you'll see there are a bunch of other services that we list in here. So all of these might not apply to you. So assessment costs would be something that we would put in here. So if you're paying for some kind of an assessment, you would put the total cost there in a description. If you're doing orientations or some kind of structured group activity and are sort of buying something to do sort of during those meetings, like if you have a workbook or curricula or anything like that, you'd put that information in here. Then if there are education costs, so these would be non-training costs. So things like GED classes, ESL classes, anything like that, that would fall under the education bucket. And then the vocational skills training, that's going to get at sort of more traditional training where you're going out and paying a community college or something like that to provide training to an individual. And then the final one here is work-based learning. So that's getting at things like on-the-job training. So we would want to know sort of those costs. I'm going to stop here for a minute because I've seen some things flashing. So are there additional questions that I should field right now?
We're okay, Brittany. It's questions that I've been answering.
Okay, great. Okay, so you'll see here there's just some additional questions about if you're doing structured group activities. I'm just going to keep moving through these tabs since we're tight on time. The next field here, or tab of the workbook, is around pilot-specific supplies and equipment. So if you've gone out and purchased anything like, I don't know, computers or other office equipment or that kind of thing for the pilot, we would put that here. So, and again, it would just be what you got purchased, the price, and the percent with pilot funds. The same goes for if you're like renting equipment rather than actually buying it. We're capturing that there. Okay, so that's everything on that tab. And the last one is around overhead and operating costs.
Brittany, don't worry about the time. You don't have to rush.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, but I also, I know this is a lot of information to digest. So this next tab, as I said, is overhead and operating costs. So this first bucket here is if you have sort of just an overhead line item in your budget, you could put that here and sort of explain what's included in that and then the cost associated with it and then any of your percent of that that's paid with pilot funds. But below this is information about facility costs. So, all of your organizations are operating out of some kind of a facility to provide pilot services. I suspect in this case, these are standing facilities that you guys, have already been operating out of them and you're using them as part of the pilot. So for facilities, we do want to get at what that cost actually is. So we would want a description of the facility, sort of the type of facility. So this, could be something just as simple as like office. Then we have here facility is, and this means is that facility something that you own? Is it rented? Is it donated? That kind of a thing. And then your facility cost. So if you're renting, that facility or you own it or something like that, and you have a monthly payment for it, we would want to know that here. And then again, we'd ask if that was a monthly or annual or some other time frame cost. And then we'd want to know the percent of that facility cost that's paid with SNAP ENT pilot funds. So it could be that that's zero, and that's fine, but we want to know sort of that the pilot is using that facility but not funding it. And then the next field here is around facility usage. So we would want to know, okay, you have your facility and, you're serving pilot clients out of about 50% of that facility. We would want to know that here. And then we'd want to know the number of months used by that the facility was used by the pilot. So, I think that that's probably almost always just going to be 3, and we'll put that in there, and it'll just carry over. So this whole facility piece, I think, is likely just going to be something we get on the front end, and then you would just note any changes to it. So I think most of this information would carry over since those kinds of costs are typically pretty set. And then, obviously, you typically have to have some utilities to run your facility. So if you're paying phone or internet, we want to know that here and what the total amount you paid during the reporting period is. Same goes for other utilities. The other pilot I'm working with, like heat, water, electricity, is all rolled into there. So if that's the case, you wouldn't have to worry about reporting that here. Okay, and then the final field here is around indirect costs. So if your organization calculated an indirect cost rate for the pilot, we would want to know that, and we'd want to know what that rate was and the amount paid during that reporting period. I think this is less common among the providers and something that we're seeing more with grantees, but I didn't want to cause any confusion with it. And again, most of those would just be completed on the front end and carry over. So this was a ton of information. So one thing I do, let's see, I want to see if I can switch what I'm sharing. So we have a bunch of resources to help as you guys work through doing cost data. So the first resources are Emily and I. So we'll be able to answer any questions that you might have about things related to the cost study. But we also have, and I think you can see this on my screen right now, but if not, it was shared before this. I can see it. Okay, great. So this is a detailed question and answer document that's explicitly about the cost study. So at the front end of it, you'll see there's a table of contents that gets into all of the different components of the cost study and can help point you to additional information on them. So things like just the general analysis, the cost data collection requirements, all of that kind of information. And you'll see, you can see here, there's some highlighted information that notes when things have been updated. So this is a living document, and we'll always, excuse me, distribute it when we distribute the workbooks so that you have it as sort of a desk reference when they're being completed. And then the other document that was sent out, and I don't think I can totally pull it up right now, it's just a data collection checklist. So, I went through that whole workbook that, had a ton of fields, but we have a checklist that's just kind of getting at what we're getting for each of those different buckets. So that's something that's probably a little bit easier to digest and just sort of shows you the key takeaways of what we'll need for the cost study. So I know the webinar time has basically run out, but I don't know if there were any other questions that came through that I can answer. And again, Emily and I are here as resources, so we're happy to have additional conversations about this. One other thing I also wanted to mention, in the fall, we had a webinar for partners and providers across all of the pilots, but you all had not been selected yet at that point in time, so weren't able to join it. But that has been recorded, and I'm going to work with Tammy and Natasha to get you all access to that so that you can have something to go back to as well.
We're happy to add that to our playlist as a link on the partner resources for the staff, for the CBO staff.
And I'll work with you all to figure out exactly how we can do that because it's a pretty big file, so I need to make sure I can figure out how to get it to everyone.
Oh,
thanks, Brittany.
This is Dee, by the way. Do you have that? Do you have that on a YouTube channel or?
It's not on a YouTube channel. It's on. I can get into it sort of with you all after. It's a little bit more complicated, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks, Brittany. And this is, I know it's a lot to consume. And I guess one of the things I would like to ask is if potentially, and I know Brittany said that we have to do some infrastructure setup. And if I could get maybe, say, 3 to 5 volunteers from the CBOs to make sure that we're setting up this infrastructure, correctly for you guys, it would be great if I can get somebody that's from a CBO that does their training internally, and then a CBO that does, contractual training also. But my thought is if we can get, 3 to 5 of you guys in the field to work with us on the infrastructure of that also. Brittany, does that make sense to make sure that we're setting it up for the specific needs?
I think so. I mean, are you sort of getting at the infrastructure, like within the organizations of how you're collecting costs and reporting costs?
Exactly. Yeah, and the drop downs, what the drop downs, should be, for those original ones. So, it probably would be helpful, like I said, if we have input definitely from the field on this. So, like if we can get a few people to volunteer, you can either, volunteer here in the chat pod now, or you can send me an email and say that you would have, be willing to, assist us to make sure that we're, setting things up. And then we can kind of get you guys trained on it too, and you can be other resources for us with this also.
And just what I'll mention now, so I think like what would be most helpful from the CBOs, so, I'm not as involved in this pilot. I'm not part of sort of the ongoing conversation, so I don't know how every organization operates and exactly what kind of services are being provided. So the key information that would be helpful to us so that we can structure these workbooks more completely so that you guys have to do less work is just kind of an overview of the different types of staff that are providing pilot services, so their titles and sort of those key responsibilities, because then we can go through and put all of that information into the workbooks. And then just sort of the key services that are being provided as well, because then we can do a little bit more filling in of those workbooks for you and can kind of highlight the places that we really need people to complete information so that you're not just being faced with an empty Excel file that needs to be updated.
Yeah,
Cheryl
sounds great.
Pullman is our first volunteer.
Great. Great. If we get a couple more, like I said, Brittany, what we could probably do is just do a webinar with you with, like I said, 3 to 5 people kind of walking through it, seeing what all makes sense with it.
Yeah, exactly. And what I did with the other pilot I'm working with is we basically did that where we had a webinar with some folks from the partners, and I had, the workbook up on the screen and was entering information into it as they were providing it so that, we could all be on the same page and get a better sense of what it would actually look like. So we can definitely do something like that. Yeah,
that'd be perfect. So, that'd be great. I think that's a good way to get these. And like we said, it looks pretty onerous on the front side, but once we get it, established and once you go through it one time, it should be a relatively simple process. And we'll coordinate this with your quarterly reports that are due to our department also so that we can, make sure we're reporting everything. Hopefully that's okay with our evaluation team at the same time.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and the one other thing I would just sort of mention to wrap up. So, like I said, this looks overwhelming. It's a big workbook that's intended to, it's structured so that, we can get all of the information across all of the 10 and the partners and providers within them. The workbook has more rather than less in it, and workbook right now, but once you actually start getting down to individual organizations, it starts getting much, much smaller. So that's just something to keep in mind so it doesn't seem quite so large and looming in the future.
Thank you so much. Well, if you have any questions, go ahead and type them in the chat pod. Be sure to download these documents, take a look at these documents, and within the next, like I would say, 2 weeks, we'll get a team together to work with Brittany, and then she'll be able to get those established and start getting them out. And Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong, that when they're due, they send the workbooks to you direct?
That's something that we can talk about.
Okay.
It's really kind of up to you guys in terms of what your preference is. If you'd rather get the workbooks as a whole and send them to us, we can do that. Otherwise, we can establish a process where they go directly to us.
Okay, we can work out that process then.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Well, like I said, on your screen you see those files, so please download those, start looking at those because this is going to be something that will be required, and then we'll get a small team together to work with Brittany so that we can try and pre-populate everything that we possibly can that makes sense.
Great.
Okay, and with that, I know that we had another question, or we had a question related to what I was discussing earlier on the GRS and requesting cash and reporting costs. Next Wednesday, we will do the training on the GRS, but once your grants are obligated at the comptroller's office, you'll be able to go in and you're going to be able to report all of your costs that have actually incurred. So these costs have to be, supported by, a trial balance by your accounting system. So whatever your legitimate costs are to this program through the end of June, to June 30th, can be reported in the GRS, and then cash. And one of the things that we're looking at right now is the advanced side of it and what we can do on that. Specifically in light that the state doesn't have a budget. So in our IGA with DHS, they allowed us for 1 month of operating expenditures in the IGA. So like I said, once again, we're going to go through this next Wednesday to report in the GRS. And if it's available before then, and if you have experience with that, you can go into the GRS and you can start doing that. But we will provide the webinar Wednesday for everybody so you know how to do that. And by next Wednesday, hopefully we'll have some more idea exactly what's going on the budget side and the appropriation side in the state of Illinois and where the direction is with that. So with that...
I still have a couple things.
Okay.
Just to remind everybody, the 2151s and the 2151As need to be downloaded and marked with Adobe Reader. They cannot. The system will not read pencil or pen handwritten check marks. So you please use the 2151 and the 2151A. The other thing that we'd like to know is there's a couple of people that have some participants that are done with some of the basic activities and they're waiting for a cohort to start on a training program. So what are some additional activities that you have your participants do to keep them with, especially if they're mandatory, keep them working with that 20 hours a week? If you want to type some of those in the chat pod, we'll leave the chat pod going and we'll collect that and put that into a document for the CBO resources on the Partner Resources page.
And currently the only thing I see up is the downloadable file is expanded.
Are you the file pod? Is that what you're talking about?
There we go. Okay.
This one?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if everybody saw the same thing where it was just the downloadable files. Now we're back in action. There we go.
Okay. All right. I personally had some issues with Adobe Connect today, so.
And if I don't get enough volunteers, I may reach out because, like I said, I do want to have a pretty good mix for those that are in-house training providers and those that actually contract out for the training providers, because that could be a little different on how the workbooks are established also. So if I don't get the volunteers, I may be selecting you guys. Drafting, yes. It's to your benefit because then we'll make sure that everything is established that, makes sense on how you're doing your work there.
All right, so we have Krishina from OAI and Cheryl from Community Assistance.
Community Assistance Program. Great, thanks guys.
So Krishina, I need to call you, but I need to know what number to call you when we're done.
Okay, with that, is there anything, Natasha or Dee, additional that we need to discuss?
I'm good.
Great. Guys, thanks for being so patient with us and continuing to do the services with us. I know this, especially getting the grants established, it's been a long process, and thank God that we finally got them out the door, and most of you should if you don't already have your signed copy of it. So I really appreciate your patience and your support with this program, and we're going to, like I said, keep plugging forward. Now we'll be able to get the money out and start really trying to move the clients out. Our next move is to really increase our numbers and get the the clients circulated to you guys. Okay, thank you.